You know, if you ask an AI to create music, its primary instinct is to just fill every available millisecond with data.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
It fundamentally hates empty space.
Right. It's basically designed from the ground up to just predict the next token or generate the next pixel or output the next audio wave.
Exactly. More is always better for the machine.
Yeah. So the question becomes, how do you teach a machine to just shut up?
Well, that is the defining question of what we're looking at today. Trying to take an algorithmic entity that's built for maximum output and somehow force it to understand hesitation.
And that brings us to the project we're exploring on this deep dive. It's an album, though. Honestly, album almost feels like too small a word for it.
Yeah, it's more of an audio monument.
Seriously. It's titled Kind of Miles, Bated Breath in Blue. And it clocks in at a staggering 1 hour, 39 minutes, and 34 seconds.
Which is massive.
It is, but we're not looking at some, technical showcase of how fast a computer can render a billion notes.
Right, it's not some display of algorithmic excess.
Yeah. Exactly. It's actually this deeply vulnerable attempt to teach a machine the hardest lesson in music, which is restraint, the space between the notes.
And the timing of this is just incredibly poignant for anyone listening right now, because today actually marks the 100th birthday of Miles Davis.
Wow, 100 years.
Yeah, it's a centenary milestone that really forces us to acknowledge that we're still living inside the sonic universe he built.
We really are.
He was this seismic cultural force who literally altered how humanity perceives time and tension and sound.
So our mission today for you listening is to bridge two worlds that seem, on the surface, completely contradictory.
Very contradictory, yeah.
We're taking the smoky, analog vulnerability of 1959 modal jazz, and we are colliding it with the bleeding edge of generative AI.
Which is just a wild concept.
It really is. We want to unpack how this project captures the emotional philosophy of Miles Davis without just, cheaply imitating him, and how a human being uses code to remain the ultimate emotional architect.
Well, to really grasp the magnitude of this, I think we first have to look at the landscape of modern digital music production.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Because the default state of music right now is a profound fear of silence.
Yes. I always think of it like musical Botox.
Oh, musical Botox. That's a brilliant way to put it.
Right, because every beat is perfectly quantized to a grid, and every flaw is smoothed out, every frequency is compressed and just pushed to maximum volume.
Yeah, it leaves absolutely no room for the wrinkles of human emotion.
Exactly. You end up with this wall of sound that is technically perfect, but it's completely exhausting to listen to.
It really is. Digital production relies on relentless metric perfection. But Miles Davis, he weaponized silence.
He really did.
He told his musicians to literally look for the notes that weren't there.
Yeah.
And that philosophy crystallized completely in 1959. That's the ghost that haunts this entire new AI project.
So let's ground that history for the listener real quick, because that shift that happened in 1959 at Columbia's 30th Street studio is, well, it's the entire foundation for Kind of Miles.
Absolutely foundational.
Because before that session, jazz was completely dominated by bebop, and bebop is like sprinting through a maze.
Yeah, a very fast, very stressful maze.
Right, it's frantic. At these complex mathematical chord changes coming at you every 2 beats, the musicians are basically showing off their sheer athletic ability to navigate this harmonic obstacle course.
But then Miles walks into that massive converted church of a studio in 1959 and completely abandons the maze. He embraces modal jazz.
Okay, break down the mechanics of modal jazz for us, just so we understand exactly what the AI was later tasked to recreate.
Sure. So in modal jazz, instead of sprinting through a rapid progression of different chords, you take a single scale, a single mood, like D Dorian, and you just sit there. You let that one harmonic structure hang suspended in midair for minutes at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, it forces the musicians to stop relying on complex chord changes to generate interest. They have to rely on melody, tone, and spacing. It forces everyone, including the listener, to slow down and inhabit this profound stillness.
But see, if AI naturally wants to fill that silence and resolve tension, the creator of Kind of Miles must have essentially had to trick the machine into hesitating.
Oh, absolutely. They had to manipulate its core instincts.
Right. And here's what's really interesting. I'm looking at the prompt they used in Google Flow Music, and it is just a masterclass in the psychological manipulation of a digital system.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Even the title gives away the strategy, right? Kind of Miles anchors the historical lineage, but Bated Breath in Blue is the literal mechanism.
Exactly. It's all about moderation. Holding back the sound. The prompt engineering here isn't telling the AI to just do nothing.
Because if you do that, it usually just causes an error, right?
An error or some generic ambient drone. Instead, it instructs the AI that the empty space is a tangible physical instrument itself.
Let's actually dive into the text of this prompt because the way that subverts the AI's default programming is so cool. It starts with acoustic modal jazz ballad, slow, unhurried, 60 BPM.
Which is very deliberate.
Yeah, because standard AI music models default to strict grid-aligned tempos. Everything locks in perfectly. So how does the word unhurried change the math?
Well, jazz requires elasticity. The moment a beat locks perfectly onto a digital grid, it loses its soul.
Right.
By specifically feeding flow music the word unhurried, the human architect is forcing the pacing algorithm to introduce micro delays.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so instead of triggering a note at precisely 1.0 seconds, the AI calculates a slight hesitation and triggers it at like 1.015 seconds. It mathematically simulates the natural, imperfect hesitation of a human being deciding when to exhale.
Man, that is wild. And then we get to the tone. The prompt demands a solitary, close-mic'd trumpet with a Harman mute full of breathy texture.
Yeah.
Which if you just ask an AI for a trumpet, it defaults to the most pristine, synthetic marching band brass sound imaginable, right? It's loud and bright.
Which is the exact opposite of vulnerability. The Harman mute is a physical object. A trumpet player sticks it into the bell of the horn, and it blocks the main flow of air and forces it out through a smaller tube.
So it changes the whole frequency.
Right, it filters out all the aggressive lower frequencies and leaves this sharp, tight, metallic buzz. By demanding that specific physical constraint in the prompt, the creator restricts the AI's frequency output.
And adding breathy texture is just the genius move there.
It really is.
Because it grounds the digital signal in physical reality.
Exactly. It forces the audio generation engine to synthesize organic noise. You aren't just hearing the musical note, you are demanding the AI simulate the sound of human lungs pushing physical air, scraping through a brass pipe. That friction is where the intimacy lives.
Wow. Okay, the prompt continues, moving into the harmony. Rooted in the Dorian mode, accompanied by a soft acoustic piano comping with open modal chords. I want to pause here because this directly addresses what we discussed earlier about bebop versus modal jazz. Standard AI engines are trained on millions of pop and classical songs, which means they are obsessed with the VI chord progression.
Right, the VI progression is basically the backbone of Western music.
Yeah.
Think of pop song chorus ending, or the final amen at the end of a hymn. It's the harmonic journey from tension back to home base it resolves.
It ties everything up with a neat little bow.
Exactly. And that is the data the machine knows best.
Kind of Blue is legendary precisely because it refuses to give you that neat little bow. So specifying Dorian mode acts as this guardrail against the AI's predictive instincts.
It restricts the pitch prediction model from moving toward that predictable resolution.
Right. It traps the virtual bass and piano in this atmospheric, tense, harmonic space that never fully releases. It's like leaving a question unanswered for an hour and a half.
And that sustained tension is incredibly demanding on the listener, but it's also deeply rewarding.
Which brings us to how the rhythm section is prompted. Oh yeah, the instructions ask for a delicate whisper-quiet rhythm using wire brushes on a crisp snare drum and a sizzling ride cymbal.
Because if you leave it up to the AI, you get heavy transient attacks.
And for anyone listening who might not be an audio engineer, a transient attack is that sharp, immediate spike in volume when a wooden drumstick physically hits a drum skin. It's aggressive.
Right. A transient attack commands your attention immediately, but wire brushes smear that transient.
Smear it.
Yeah, instead of a sharp spike, you get a continuous whispering scrape across the drum head. By dictating wire brushes and a sizzling ride cymbal, the creator forces flow music's high-frequency generators to produce sustained white noise textures rather than rhythmic impacts.
Whoa, so it completely alters the psychological energy of the track.
Completely. It places you in a smoky late-night room instead of a sterile concert hall.
Which perfectly sets up the final piece of the prompt we have to discuss. Cavernous, dark studio room acoustics with natural tape warmth, high dynamic range, leaving massive room for silence.
I love that part.
Me too, because digital reverb usually sounds so cold and mathematical. I mean, it's literally just algorithms calculating reflections.
But Miles recorded in a massive converted church with 100-foot ceilings.
Right.
So by demanding dark studio room acoustics with natural tape warmth, the human creator manipulates the spatial modeling component of the AI. Analog tape is essentially a sonic sponge. It absorbs the harsh, bright, high frequencies.
Ah, I see.
So the decay tail of the reverb is instructed to roll off those bright digital reflections, resulting in this deep, vintage, melancholic sound.
You know, it makes me think about how most people interact with AI today. Standard prompting is kind of like walking up to a fast food counter. You say, give me a pop song about a dog, and 3 seconds later it hands you a shiny, prepackaged burger.
A very plastic burger.
Exactly. But this specific acoustic modeling workflow, it's more like giving a method actor highly specific, traumatic psychological motivations.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You aren't just telling the machine what notes to play. You're dictating the heavy, burdened headspace it needs to inhabit before it even opens its mouth.
And that analogy gets to the very heart of the production process and how a human being actually chains these disparate tools together to create art. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the AI is not the artist. The AI is a complex instrument.
Let's actually map out that instrumentarium, because the production environment for this album is fascinating. They didn't just type a paragraph into a single website and hit download.
Not at all. The creator built this inside a highly specific stack. They're working in a stable, open-source Linux environment, specifically Ubuntu 26.04. That serves as the foundation.
Okay, Ubuntu.
Right, but before any audio is even generated, the conceptual framework is hammered out using large language models. And they aren't asking Claude or ChatGPT or Meta's AI to write the music.
Right, they're using those LLMs as debate partners to refine the adjectives.
Exactly. If the AI keeps outputting a trumpet that sounds too brassy, the human uses the LLM to brainstorm acoustic engineering terms like Harmon mute or transient smearing.
Yeah.
That will successfully trick the audio model.
And then there is the unpredictability factor, which they introduced using chance-based tools like perchance.org.
Because where it gets in the concept of aleatory art.
Right, chance-based creativity, which avant-garde composers like John Cage pioneered decades ago.
Aleatory art is crucial here. If you perfectly control every variable, you just get a sterile output. So by routing the prompt parameters through perchance.org, the creator randomized certain variables before feeding them into Google Flow Music.
Oh, so like maybe the room size changes slightly?
Yeah, or the simulated distance of the microphone shifts by a few inches.
It basically rolls the dice on the prompt to see what Flow Music generates.
Exactly, and that introduces unpredictable emotional directions. The Flow Music model might generate a breathy trumpet phrase with a bizarre, almost mistaken micro-delay that a human composer never would have written on paper.
Because it sounds like the player simply ran out of breath.
Yes.
But the human has to catch that. They are feeding all of this raw generated audio into an alpha build of Audacity 4 to mix this massive dynamic range.
They really are.
They're literally listening to hours and hours of audio, recognizing the vulnerability in that mistake and deciding to keep it.
And that is the difference between pressing a button and actually creating meaningful art. The human is doing the curation. They're the ones meticulously carving out the soul from the noise. They delete the excess. They author the restraint.
But I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because it's kind of the philosophical elephant in the room for anyone who truly loves analog human-made music.
Okay, what is it?
If the machine is ultimately the thing generating the audio waves based on this clever code, can the resulting music actually carry genuine emotional authenticity? Or are we, as humans, just projecting our own loneliness onto simulated tape hiss and slow tempos?
That's the big question.
Like, are we just being successfully manipulated by a very good algorithm?
Yeah. Honestly, that is the most profound question we face in the age of generative media. Does the origin of the sound negate its emotional impact?
Right?
Think about a traditional acoustic piano. Piano doesn't feel sad when you play a minor chord.
No, it's just furniture.
Exactly. The wood, the felt, the steel strings, they possess zero emotion. They are just physical mechanisms that vibrate. The emotional weight comes entirely from the human who decided to press that specific combination of keys with that specific velocity at that exact moment.
So you're saying flow music is just the wood and the strings?
Yes. In Kind of Miles, the AI is executing the math of a micro-delay. It's running an acoustic simulation of a church. But the intent is entirely human.
Right.
The AI has no concept of what loneliness sounds like. The human creator recognized that our modern world is overwhelmingly loud, over-quantized, and exhausted.
Yeah.
And they use this vast computational power to intentionally curate an empty, quiet space.
Wow.
The vulnerability is authentic because the human curation of that silence is authentic.
It's the curation of the silence. The machine generated the audio waves, but the human offered the restraint.
Exactly.
And it really makes you wonder how future historians will view this era. I mean, we are celebrating the centenary of Miles Davis, a man who completely disrupted the musical establishment of his time. And people initially pushed back against modal jazz, too.
They really did. Every technological or structural shift terrifies us initially. Future musicologists will likely look back at this exact moment of human-AI collaboration, not as the death of human creativity, but simply as another evolutionary chapter.
Right, like the introduction of multi-track tape recording.
Or synthesizers in the 70s.
Yeah.
Or digital sampling in the 80s. Or the birth of ambient music.
Yeah.
In every instance, purists claim the new technology lacked a human soul. And in every instance, artists eventually figured out how to embed their humanity into the new wires. They found a way to make the machines bleed.
That's a great way to put it.
This project proves that generative AI can be used as a catalyst for experimentation. It's an improvisational partner, rather than just a cheap replacement for human artistry.
So we started this deep dive sitting in the concept of a dark, quiet room, listening to analog hiss and a hesitant trumpet. We've explored how kind of Miles' Bated Breath in Blue takes the historic modal stillness of 1959 jazz and painstakingly translates it through the bleeding edge of Google Flow music.
It's quite a journey.
It is. We unpacked the massive tech stack from Ubuntu to LLMs to Audacity that made it possible. And I think that the major takeaway for you listening right now is the proof that artificial intelligence does not have to equal overwhelming noise.
Absolutely not.
By deliberately engineering concepts like breath texture, suspended Dorian phrasing, and transient smearing, a human being can successfully guide a machine past digital perfection and straight into profound emotional vulnerability.
It does leave us with a really fascinating philosophical thought to ponder, though.
Lay it on us.
Well, we spent all this time discussing how a human taught an AI to simulate our physical limitations. You know, the need to breathe, the hesitation of a finger on a valve, the acoustics of a physical room.
Right.
But as these generative models become more sophisticated and untethered from human curation, what happens when an AI begins to develop its own musical scales or emotional syntaxes?
Oh, wow.
Right. We might eventually see algorithms generating tension and resolution structures that don't rely on the VI progression or Dorian mode at all. Structures that are mathematically beautiful, but completely incomprehensible to the human ear.
That's eerie.
We've taught the machine how to sound like us, but eventually it might decide to sound entirely like itself.
What a thought to end on. As the machines learn to explore their own vast spaces, it just makes the human curation of an album like this feel all the more precious.
It really does.
Well, thank you for joining us on this intimate exploration today. We really encourage you to find kind of Miles. Bated Breath in Blue, put on a good pair of headphones, turn off the notifications, and just experience the quiet for yourself.
Step into that late night smoky room.
And listen to the notes they didn't play. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.